Hi friends, the episode you're about to hear is a special TV Tuesday covering Joss Whedon's creation, Dollhouse. Just wanted to let you know that the episode is full spoilers, so if you haven't watched Dollhouse, you may want to sit this one out. Also wanted to just let you all know that this episode contains discussions of a lot of heavier topics, mainly sexual assault, trauma, violence, consent, mental illness, suicide, sex, human trafficking, stalking. So if you're not in the right headspace at the moment, feel free to tap out on this one and we'll meet up with you next time.
Welcome to our pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But sometimes
we're three best friends.
We're three best friends, and we cover TV shows that we're pretty sure no one asked for except specifically Hannah and Dani.
Hannah and Dani lead Laura astray is what the title of this episode is.
Because today we welcome to the podcast again, Dani Finn, renowned author. Thank you and welcome to the pod. Thank you for being on here.
Thanks for having me. Dollhouse is one of my special interests with the trademark logo. I don't know why it is, but it is literally the one show that I've watched the most often, that I watch the most frequently, despite how incredibly problematic it is. So when I heard you were up for doing a podcast, I was like, hell yeah.
So this came about because we had Dani on to talk about queer romance in books. It's one of our best episodes of the year. People loved that.
Very
episode,
great
just
feedback.
So you know, Dani,
yes, thank you so much.
Oh, good.
But we were talking afterwards, and we were talking about like, oh, we're starting to do these TV Tuesdays if you're interested. And somehow it came up that like both Hannah and Dani had watched Dollhouse and were pretty big fans of like Joss Whedon's least famous show. And so we decided that we were just going to make Laura watch it because it was a good time for me. It was a great time for Dani. And Laura, the jury is out. But
the jury is out. I got these from the library, and I got some interesting looks from the librarian.
Well, okay, so first off, Dani asked this off air, but it bears repeating. Dani, what is your experience with Joss Whedon as a whole, and then specifically with this show in context with that?
So I am an old, and I watched Buffy live, when it came out, all the way through, and Angel as well. And then after that, anything, and at the time I was much less critical than I am of it now, of course, but anything Joss would put out, we were excited for. So obviously we watched Firefly, and we watched Dollhouse, and I was very put off by Dollhouse initially because I was like, ooh, this is kind of creepy, like, feels very, it's the way that it dealt with women and objectification was not nearly as improved as I had hoped. But I fell in love with it like halfway through the first season, and the second season we just were like, oh my God. So we rewatched all of the Whedons periodically, but Dollhouse is the one we rewatched the most. We're currently rewatching Buffy with our kids for the second time. We have teenagers who they're intellectually disabled, but they're very into vampires. So we're trucking along through there.
Teenagers and their vampires, man, you can't get away from it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that seems probably like a super age appropriate thing for
except Buffy. For all the stuff that's not, but anyway.
Oh, I haven't seen the show, so I wouldn't know. I just heard vampires, was like, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, the stuff about Dollhouse that you don't like, it's also on, I'm assuming it's also on Buffy. And some really creepy, cringy stuff.
Yeah. So Laura, what is your experience with the Joss Whedon verse?
So my experience is that Hannah and Dani told me we would like to cover Dollhouse.
So this is your first Whedon?
Yes.
It's actually technically it is not her first Whedon.
What's my first one? I don't know a lot of this book.
Oh, the Avengers.
The Avengers movie.
Age of Ultron.
Age of Ultron.
It's the Avengers movies.
Yes.
So the first couple ones were directed by Joss Whedon. So that was your first experience.
Okay, so I guess I'm not off to a great start.
But also, Laura famously hated those two movies, and I don't I don't know if you remember us talking about it on air when I talked about like the Joss Whedon of it all.
I do remember this now that you're bringing it up, because I was complaining about
Captain America.
Captain
she would-
America and Tony Stark in those movies, because Tony Stark is portrayed to be such a cool guy, and Captain America is always like, we gotta follow the rules. Why aren't we following the rules? And it's so annoying to watch. And Hannah was explaining the way that Joss Whedon
views
depicts
like
men and how
yes.
it can be very skewed in a certain direction. And this is all making sense now.
What direction would that be?
Basically that like the more masculine types are not preferred is kind of the thing that I would take away from this, and that the smart guys that don't get enough credit, they're the ones that we should be all respecting, like Tony Stark and Topher from
What?
Dollhouse.
And I think even Xander from Buffy, which
Xander's, yes.
is basically is very much Joss. And in some ways, like, you appreciate the fact that he's making fun of himself, but also Xander is really gross, and the longer the show goes on, the more you hate him if you have a feminist bone in your body.
There is a very specific trajectory of like smart guy equals like one of the hottest girls, but she's also kind of terrible. Like that is also a trope of like, oh yes, I get one of the hottest women, but they're also mean to me. So doesn't that make you feel bad for me? That's like a very Whedon like trope of
I could pick up on that too.
Yeah. Although interestingly, Topher basically gets nobody.
He gets some hot people, and
sort of.
He gets that one hot woman who ends up being really bad.
I assume we're going full spoiler territory.
Yes.
Not worried about any of that.
Sorry, listeners. There are tons of spoilers.
There is going to be tons of spoilers, and also please, like a lot of our TV Tuesdays, I'm like, you could hear us do a plot breakdown. We can't on this show, and
There's
honestly,
too much.
It's going to sound like a very confusing thing. So we do actually recommend maybe watching a couple of episodes just to get the vibe. Of
should we try to summarize what the show is about?
Yes. So I
actually, Hannah, first give your Joss Whedon story.
My first Joss Whedon was actually Angel. So there was a time in my life where I did not have cable, and then we were able to steal the WB out of Madison, Wisconsin. And I watched every single WB show that was available to me because it was the only cable television at the time. I think I didn't watch Buffy at that time. I think it was towards the end of the seasons because there were too many of the seasons. So there was no way I could possibly understand. But I watched the Charms, the Smallvilles, the Angel. All of those things were like definitely on my rotation. So
How old were you?
I was in high school.
I'm just thinking about how the age category of that Buffy and Angel were aimed at, I think, is lower than what Dollhouse was aimed at. Maybe it was aimed at the fans who then grown up a little bit or something.
Mm-hmm. I believe so. And so I remember my dad and I both watched Angel together, and he loved Angel. And I thought it was pretty good. Like I thought it was interesting, but it was also a little, you're in high school and Whedon is well known to kill off characters or break people up. And I remember
so you get attached to them and then they're gone.
Mad when like couples would break up and couldn't be together anymore. Cause I was like, why is he doing this to me? Which he is actually very effective at like building and making it, not that happily ever after that a lot of people are expecting.
But at a certain point, he just does it to be a dick.
Yes, but at certain points, he's just doing it to put a hat on a hat. I was also a huge fan of the Avengers movies and Avengers Age of Ultron when they first came out. But I have tried to watch Firefly, and I usually can't get over the fact that a lot of times they're out of order or they're confusing or just like the story doesn't quite click for me when I try to watch it at times when I've watched it. So I haven't really watched all of Firefly yet.
It's only one season.
I know. So I think I've only watched like 1.5 episodes, if I'm being honest. Like I know that and then I started watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm slowly going through it. I don't binge it as much, but I think I'm on season 3 now.
Okay, at least you're into the good stuff.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to watch. So I'm a little bit of a Joss Whedon person, but I'm by no means an expert. And I was also, so I watched Angel, and then I watched Dollhouse, and then I was in college and I was a little bit pretentious, aka a lot of bit pretentious. So I remember I nerded out hard when his Much Ado About Nothing came out, and I watched that in like our college town's frou-frou theater. I remember watching that and going specifically to watch that. So and I loved the fact that he used different characters over and over again, and like, or actors and actresses over and over again, and like I loved all that stuff. So I very much enjoyed him during like high school and college, and then I was just less I was less involved with him throughout my life. So it's fun to come back to it. But I remember when all the bad stuff came out, I was like, oh, okay, I could believe that. And then I just kind of moved on with my life. So um but yes, so the show Dollhouse, it was created by Joss Whedon. It's actually, the lore is Eliza Dushku was she had just signed a contract with Fox, and she reached out to Joss Whedon on what to do with that. I believe during that era, wasn't she also the actress who did Tru Calling, which was also another one of my favorite sci-fi
I'm not
shows.
sure.
Let me double check that really quick, because I wondered if that was during her contract era. Um, and this
And
show,
she's
She
a,
is in
a
Tru
Slayer named
Calling.
Faith
yes,
on Buffy, and
so
an Angel
she,
as well.
yes, so during her Fox, she had like a Fox contract, and during this, she came out with Tru Calling, which was also canceled. It ran from 2003 to 2005, where she worked in a morgue, and dead bodies would tell her to save them, and then she would go back in time and have to save them. And it
See,
was
I
a,
recognized her immediately from Bring It On, the famous scene. I
oh
transferred
yeah.
from Los Angeles. Your school has
School
no
has no
gymnastics
gymnastics
team.
team. This
This is
is
a
the
last
last
resort.
resort. Um, I also always thought it would be funny if she made fun of how bad they were in football when she did that cheer. She was like, "Your
Yeah.
your team is sure not number one. I've checked your ballot scores." So anyway, she was represented with Fox. She had this deal with them, and she called Joss Whedon to kind of talk about her career trajectory and where it was going. And during lunch, he developed this plan of Dollhouse. So that was kind of what it was born
Interesting.
out of.
Like
So
he didn't even have the idea for the show before, or
I think he didn't even really have the idea for the show before. Like they were just talking about what her goals were, and he kind of talked about this. And he had actually been trying to get into movies at this time, so he didn't even really
So this
want to
whole
do
show was created for her,
TV.
basically.
Yes, it was pretty much created for Eliza Dushku. She had been in Buffy, and she is one of the favored people in Buffy, Laura. Like she's one of the
Okay.
tortured souls that a lot of people like coming back and back to. So she's been in a couple of his things before now, and with Dollhouse, he kind of created this for her.
Okay.
It premiered February 13th, 2009 on Fox, and it was canceled while they were developing season 2. They'd renewed it for season 2, but it was also canceled within the first year. So
Which is kind of shocking. You'd think that this would be like a really popular show.
So it was canceled November 11th, 2009, and there is a lot of like lore that it didn't get canceled right away because Fox also canceled Firefly, which is one of Joss Whedon's like fan favorite shows, Laura, and everyone talks about how it was
yep.
canceled in the first season and it was just a travesty, and a lot of it was Fox's fault because they aired episodes out of order. Kind of like just taking episodes out of here willy-nilly. They did the same thing to Dollhouse. They did some wild choices. And so they didn't want to cancel Dollhouse in the first season because they didn't want to anger the fans. And like there were whisperings that it was going to be canceled, and fans like revolted. Like they were sending in fan mail, they were doing like all this stuff to keep it from getting off the chopping block, because a lot of Joss Whedon shows, people say, get canceled far too soon and they don't let him have room to breathe. So the show revolves around a corporation that runs numerous underground establishments called dollhouses. They're around the globe, and they have these programs where individuals referred to actives or dolls are pretty much wiped clean of their personality and history, and they are
consensually.
consensually. Yeah.
I was going to say
also
somewhat
asterisk,
consensually. I don't
to the
know.
asterisk, sometimes not consensually.
Yeah.
With and once they are wiped of those, they get imprinted with temporary personalities and skills. Season 1, it's mostly about wealthy clients hiring actives from the dollhouse at great expense for various purposes, including things like heists, sexual encounters, assassinations, expert counsel, and all manners of unique experiences. In season 2,
And
it
unique
goes
experiences is right, because like right away there isn't, if am I thinking of this right, that right away she like goes off into the woods with some
so
creepo
that's
who
episode
then wants
2.
to hunt her.
Yeah.
And I specifically, episode 2 is the episode that like stayed in my mind before this rewatch.
It's the creepiest thing I've ever seen.
So that's like the Great Hunt episode. But or what is it? A great and terrible something.
I don't know.
There's a book.
It's
There's a famous book where they
disturbing.
hunt people. But so yeah, season 1 revolves around that unique experience. Season 2 goes into more of the underside of Rossum, which is this corporation, and who's actually pulling all the strings.
Who's the
and
Dollhouse runners, basically.
What they could possibly do with Dollhouse if it got out, because it is very anti-establishment, where it's like, well, if we had this technology, it would result in the end of the world where everyone loses their personality, so the rich can imprint themselves and continue on, or just for our own purposes. So
because basically the technology evolves to a point where they can use just like ray guns basically to just like point at someone and be like, whoop, wiped.
So
and that is terrifying.
Wiped and re-implanted with a new personality.
Yes.
And then you could just have multiple versions of you walking around as well. It's very interesting. So season 1, like I said, revolves around a lot of these like escapades. Episode fun facts: there is a pilot episode called Echo, I think, and it never aired. It sets everything up. Agent Ballard like starts getting wind of the Dollhouse investigation in this. He receives a photo of Eliza Dushku's character, who is named Echo /
Or Caroline,
because Echo is her doll-like version and Caroline is her true self outside of the house before the events of this series take place. And in this first episode, we meet Agent Ballard, who's an FBI agent who's looking into the Dollhouse. We meet DeWitt, who is the head of the Dollhouse in LA. Apparently there's like a hot tub scene with her and Eliza Dushku where she's like, this is what dollhouses are, this is what actives are, this is what this is, and it's just like breaking everything down. And in that episode, actives also begin to exhibit signs of self-awareness. We also meet Topher, who we mentioned. He is the brains behind the LA operation.
Who I wanted to call Spencer the entire time I was watching this. Like, I could not remember that his name was Topher.
I watched a couple episodes with my sister-in-law, and she kept being like, imagine being named Topher. Just come on.
I know several Tophers.
I know, that's what you said. And so we meet him, as well as Boyd, who is Echo's handler. Or Eliza Dushku's handler. So they have these handlers who make sure that they're protected. So this episode never aired. So we don't have that introduction. We kind of just get thrown right into it. Apparently the episode like just didn't fit well in the scheme of what the rest of the show was. And I think Joss Whedon got a bunch of studio notes and he felt like he couldn't make what they wanted. So he just
And I'm not going to lie, I don't remember this episode, episode 0. I don't know if they included it in the season.
It's not included.
No,
so I'm just kind of going over it for the fun of it. So sorry, I took you guys on this wild ride.
No, that was very interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like that kind of represents some of the issues with this show that aren't just like inherent, the isms that are sometimes seen in this show, but also a lot of times
neglecting to provide certain background information.
Yes.
Is critical. I don't know.
I think it got studio notes a bunch. If you notice in season 1, there are outdoor shots, where season 2, if they were in an outdoor shot, you blink and you miss it because they're like, we cannot have the funding to have outside scenes. Like it's a very specific change where it's all interior, and it's because they like had been like their budget had gotten slashed a ton from the first season
that
to
makes
the second
sense.
season. So this is not a real episode. It did not air. So the actual first episode is the episode where Echo someone is kidnapped and Echo is imprinted as a negotiator. Her new personality incorporated memories from another woman who was kidnapped and molested as a child by one of the kidnappers, who she now must negotiate with. during this episode, Agent Ballard also starts talking with this Russian gangster about the dollhouse. And this is also where it is confusing to not have this first episode, because it just kind of cuts in on Paul Ballard, which
to
is
Ballard, and we're like,
and he's
who
like,
are you?
there's a place called the dollhouse. And I'm like, well, this is a non sequitur.
I mean, on the other hand, Paul Ballard, I mean, what more do you really need? I mean, what he's exactly not my type, but like I cannot stop looking at him. I swear to God.
So here's
He
the
is a
thing.
beautiful man. Like,
And like the
every
way he
scene,
moves,
yes.
You
he's
guys
just fascinating.
or both of you have said this, and I don't get it. I look at Paul Ballard, and I honestly have never been less attracted to a human being in my life, and I don't know what it is.
He's a
about
wonderful
him.
actor because he's
Yes.
so annoying in this show.
It's
But
so
when
annoying.
he is like
To be
keeping
clear,
his mouth
this is
shut, not
Tama
talking.
Pennicott.
Yes.
And he is very pretty. He's just not for me. There's like a certain energy about him. I think I don't like his beady eyes. Like he has a little bit
Oh.
of a beady eye, and I'm just like, you're not for me.
I think
And
if I saw him in something else, I would be like, sold. Like it's really just the acting, the Paul of it all that holds me back.
And I feel like his hair was over gelled, and that's like a not for me thing.
I don't know. I'm okay with how he looks in this.
That's
He
fair.
is a beautiful man.
But his physicality is very important to the character in the
Yes.
show, and the way that he's dressed, like they tailored him so fucking perfectly. Like his suits and his shirts are just like molded to his physique, and he moves with this crispness. Like when he turns to the side, you can almost hear gears clicking, like he's
Yeah.
just.
Well,
And that's a talent you can't teach that. Or maybe you can teach it, but like he's a master at it. There
Well,
it
it's
is.
almost like his journey throughout both seasons is almost like a mirror of Echo's, because he's kind of rejecting the system that he was in within the FBI. So it's really interesting that you're mentioning that he's almost like robotic in his movements and everything, because he could almost be interpreted as being a doll of sorts, and how he's kind of growing beyond that.
All I'm saying is there was in one of the final episodes, Boyd has a moment where he's like, well, you are all my family, except for Ballard. We all have that family member we don't need around. And I was like, I honestly get it. That made me laugh so hard.
But Hannah, surely you can admit that he is an effective character.
Yes.
He is an effective character. I think I sometimes thought he was a little bit messier in season 2, and I didn't get his entire purpose outside of Echo.
Okay,
But
they
also,
did him dirty in the second season, though, so much.
Season 1,
At least they fridged a man.
Yeah, that's fair. But I think so. His is some of the similar issues I have to characters like Angel and Buffy. So I watched Angel when Angel was the main character, and I actually really liked that. Watching him and Buffy, I'm always like, okay, I want these two to be together because these two want to be together so badly. But honestly, also because I can't imagine them with anyone else, because I think I'd be annoyed by it. And that's like the only reason I ship them. And it's like, yeah, I think that that's a fair assessment. But I do think sometimes with the main male protagonist, Joss Whedon often doesn't make him the self-insert character. And so he cares about them less. And so because he cares about them less, I kind of care about them less, because I don't understand their narrative purpose at all times. And I felt that way about Ballard, where he seemed to be there for reasons, but it often felt like the writer of the show didn't really care why he was there. So I was like, well, why do I care if you don't care? You know, so
it seems
that
like
was
Joss Whedon has a lot of like internalized issues.
Yes.
Which he then externalizes into a show and makes it your problem.
Yeah. That we as viewers are like, yes, this man needs therapy.
So like, I didn't like Paul as much as I liked like the Tony character, because I thought Tony was actually interesting and had like a lot.
Which one is Tony?
So Tony is Victor. So
Victor.
I liked Victor
yes.
Tony. So in this episode, Ballard makes friends with this Russian gangster who we later find out is a doll. And it's actually the first time that they do this like bait and switch with us, where they're like, hey, you know, this person who is very important to this side plot, actually a doll, because they're just smarter than Paul Ballard is. And I'm like, great, loved it.
Not difficult, but okay.
And every time they do it, I'm like, that's kind of effective. I liked that you did that. Like, you can't trust anyone, and they keep trusting people.
With your life.
Yeah. And that is the Victor / Tony character, who is a doll that they just kind of had out and about for a while, and then they bring him back in. I do find it funny that out of all the dolls they have in this agency, the 5 people who hang out with Tom Ballard the most, they're like, why don't we all keep you guys collectively together just so you can hang out and talk about what you don't remember? And I'm like, why are they together? Like, split them up. There was an episode where they were like, oh yeah,
They're
sometimes
grouping.
yeah, they go, oh yeah,
Yeah.
actives group sometimes. You should split them up. And I'm like, how have they not thought about this before? Like, you can split them up.
It seems
But
like
as
they're very
Topher says,
poorly managed.
Yeah, they're terribly managed. They're just like, oh, you guys are having like good, deep friendships where you could possibly like remember if you've been imprinted. Let's not do anything about that. Let's just hope it fixes itself. Um, so yeah, the first episode is, we also hear a lot about like how Echo's not like the other actives. There's a character, Dr. Claire Saunders, who has like
Mhm.
a giant
Gash
scar on her
scar.
face. And there's just a lot of discussions about what the house is and all those things.
And Echo's like their number one active is basically what they all keep
She's
mentioning.
Soup's popular. And then episode 2 is the episode Laura talked about, which is an episode where a man hires Echo and takes her out into the woods and like puts up a scrambler so they can't.
It's all like this whole like guise of being a hot date where they're both adventurers and go hiking and climbing, and then he's like, but now the ultimate adventure, I will hunt you, and he chases her through the woods with a bow, and it's the creepiest thing I've ever seen. I did not like it.
Yeah.
Can we jump really quickly back to the first episode for 1 second
Yeah.
before we
Yes,
talk
of
about the
course.
bow hunting? So the only note that I wrote on this one was he's already using a woman's sexual trauma as a major plot point in episode 1.
Yes.
Which is like the fixation on creating situations where women experience or remember sexual trauma. I mean, is built into the fabric of the show.
Yes.
It's literally what the show is about.
Mhm.
But it also comes up episode after episode after episode, sometimes somewhat self-consciously, sometimes not. But I'm like, in a normal show, like if the show had been directed by somebody else, you know, having that happen in the first episode, be like, okay, that's fine. But then it keeps happening over and over again. And just like, ugh.
Well, and also
the amount of sexual abuse that happens in this show is overwhelming, honestly. Like, it's so much.
And I think it could be possibly interesting because you're right, Dani, it's baked into the show, but it also feels like sometimes it doesn't delve deeper than like, hey, this happens and it's wrong. Instead of like, there are certain characters.
But does it always call it out as being blatantly wrong?
I mean, some of it, no, because they're not always talking about like they do blanket it with people consent to be dolls, so it can't be sexual assault if you've agreed to this knowing that you would be participating.
Which is
in these
good
things.
that there's discussions of consent, but at the same time, then that whole discussion is kind of just tossed out the window when they revealed that, oh, technically not all of these people have consented.
Right.
Right. And they also push back later in the second season on that very idea. Like, you know, you can't, I think there's even a term, there's even a line, you can't consent to being a sex slave or something in one of the
like,
one of the later episodes in season 2, I think. I'm trying to see if I actually have this line down. I don't see it right away, but I'm pretty sure there's a line almost exactly like that.
And they do sort of talk about human trafficking in these episodes. It's like a cursory early 2000s way of doing it. And I do think it's an interesting take on sex work to be like, oh, well, maybe some sex workers would be okay if it's like, hey, this is my job and I do consent to it. And I'm okay if I don't remember every single occurrence because that's my job. But with the connotations of not everyone has consented, with connotations of like, you don't know who you're consenting to, like that is a problem. And I do think they sometimes touch on it and then they do blatantly ignore it, where it's like, hey, DeWitt is a character who runs the dollhouse and she schedules one of the dolls to be with her. And it's like never kind of addressed where it's like, well, that's technically the like manager of a company who's doing this with one of her workers. That's
total abuse of power. And
and so there's things like that never get touched on. And then there's a very
they never actually critique
Mm-mm.
they critique the sexual assault of the women, but they actually never
Mhm.
actually talk about that one. And you know what? The
Exactly.
same thing happened in Buffy, where Faith and Buffy switch bodies. Oh, you haven't seen this one yet?
I haven't seen it, but
Okay.
yeah.
Anyway, there's a similar situation there, and I feel like it's critiqued. It's not really critiqued in the same way. Buffy's just like, "You slept with her," and he's like, "I slept with you," and but she's just like she's pissed at him.
Hmm.
But he was the one who was assaulted in this
Right.
scenario.
Yeah.
And I do feel like they do mention it at once. I remember someone brings it up to DeWitt as an abuse of power, to like as a
Yeah.
reason to take her power away, but it's never talked about from the standpoint of Victor being
Of how it
someone
affects
who,
Victor.
yes, and it's very much about the women who are sexually assaulted, but it does completely erase how men are assaulted in
But
this
this was
show.
also 2009, correct?
Yes.
This was also, I feel like, a time when we were still hearing stories of young men who were being sexually abused, and it was very much like oh, high five, you
Yeah.
hooked up with an older woman, you hooked up with so-and-so's mom or your teacher or whoever it may be, high five. And we had not yet totally gotten to, at least not all of us had gotten to a place where we could be like, no, that is
Right.
actually abuse.
But I think that just shows like it does jump around. These episodes jump around a
Yeah.
lot. And so the sexual assault is always like well, that happened. And it's like, well, no, like that that should be dealt with. Like you
Yeah.
can't. And I think they do a little bit of hand waving away where they're like, well, we'll take out the bad parts. Like they took things away from Sierra because they wanted to quote unquote protect her. But they also took away like her empowering parts. Because
Yeah.
we do find out through the series that Sierra, one of the dolls, was sexually assaulted repeatedly. And she finally does kill the person, and they kind of like take that out of her, and she does remember later, but they're like, oh, we'll take out that so she never knows that she was sexually assaulted. And it's like, well, a huge part of this is she does remember, like her body remembers and she remembers all of this. And there is a very specific obsession with Sierra's sexual assaults, I would say, because she is assaulted
Yes.
by two different people
Correct.
without the look at like, hey, sexual assault victims are more likely to be re-victimized through no fault of their own, but that is something that happens in society. Why don't we identify that and try to discuss that, or to like talk to her? But instead, like her story becomes very deeply rooted in like, oh, she has her happily ever after, great,
It's
but
fine.
also
She's in love.
yeah,
We can forget all about that. She did because we wiped her brain quick, and now she's with Victor.
yeah. And
So,
it just it seems like an interesting choice, the more it goes into what you're talking about, Danny, with like the fixation they have on
yeah.
sexual assaults of women specifically.
Well, I was thinking to myself, imagine if Joss had had an enlightenment right before Dollhouse started, and if they just inserted this, they inserted the rule that dolls would not be allowed to, you can't have sex with a doll. That's not, we're not a house of prostitution. You can hire dolls for anything else but not sex. I think the show would have been a million times better. Of course, Joss might have actually had a career if he had somehow realized this fixation. But like, they could also find interesting ways to play with that. If he wanted to deal with that topic. I mean, just we're imagining a better
Honestly, the
world.
show would have been much more mainstream and probably would have had a wider audience if there wasn't that whole
Well, I
background,
also
really.
think if he had had like any capability of dealing with, and obviously this is 2009, the discussions of sex work were also very different.
Yes.
Like he didn't really have any, like it feels like he never talked to a sex worker ever about like what it means to be involved with that.
You can tell
And
from multiple things that he's just very much going off of like, I heard once about someone who did
well,
this.
he also has a weird, like, as long as it's anti-establishment. So he's like, well, I know that if it was a corporation and they were establishment, they would definitely use this for sex work. So then I get to talk about how they would use it for sex work. And it's like, but that doesn't
You're right, Hannah.
that doesn't actually give you that approval to do that without doing your homework, without doing those things. Like, yes, you could recognize that people would do that, but there are ways of doing that without making it the fixation of your show where like people have to do sexual encounters almost every episode. You could have like what you're saying, Danny, if they took it out and you found out there was a road dollhouse that was allowing this and like how they took it down, you could still have the conversations without it being like, isn't it so funny that all of these dolls are being used for sex work without their like active consent? Because like consent should be allowed to be taken away at any point, and it's not. So that was a
Episode
very
3.
episode 3. We have a bow and arrow in episode 2. Agent Ballard does receive a hint into Echo's identity. Episode 3 is the background singer episode, which did make me laugh because I think Eliza Dushku has many talents. I don't think singing is necessarily her top one.
I'll just say though, like the acting that Eliza Dushku does throughout this show is phenomenal. She is so versatile that it's extremely impressive, especially to someone who has only seen her in Bring It On. I was shocked by her range.
She has great range, just not so much while she's singing.
But I mean, it was, yes, I thought it was pretty good though. I mean,
yes.
I wouldn't say it was
could have been
terrible.
worse. No,
it wasn't terrible. It could have been worse. When it's like, oh, it's this famous pop singer, and she's like, yes, that one. I'm like, wasn't that one though? Like,
That's
can
why
we
she's
talk
background
about how
singer.
problematic this whole episode is?
Oh,
gosh.
So this episode, a lot of
But first of all, it starts with a woman in a cage. That's the first image,
Yes.
as I recall. This is what I wrote down. She's in a cage on stage, and I'm not crazy. I just want to be free. I think that's a line that comes very
I think that's
early
it.
in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this episode was so, I would say a lot of season 1. I know a lot of people prefer season 1 or season 2. I actually prefer season 1 because I like the whodunit aspects of it. I like the buildup of Alpha, which is the big bad of season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this, like, putting Echo into different scenarios and having her get out of them. I like those types of shows a lot. And so this episode is around this mystery of this singer is getting stalked by someone. And throughout the episode, and again, like, trigger warnings up the wazoo for this TV show. We will put trigger warnings at the beginning of the episode.
I'll add
I'm
something
sure.
at the beginning.
Yeah. But typically stalking is a very psychologically harmful thing that happens to people. It ruins their lives. It fixates itself into all different facets of their life. There is a TV show out about it right now. But with this episode, the singer is speaking with her stalker because she feels like it will make her like kind of go down in legend, but B, it shows, I believe if I'm remembering correctly, she has a little bit of suicidal ideation.
Yes.
Very much of suicidal ideation. There's a quote where she says, explaining why she doesn't want to live, why she wants to be killed. I don't exist. I'm not a real person. I'm everybody's fantasy. You may not be grown in a lab, but I was. And this is when she gets mad at Echo for stopping her killer from killing her.
Yes. And so it's just very, it doesn't look great with mental health. It doesn't look great with people who are stalked.
I think on a surface level, the whole like communicating with the stalker was meant to kind of show her need for some control in her life when she felt so helpless and that other people were literally pulling the strings for her. But
it's also told indirect to be like a foil to Echo, to be like,
Yeah.
oh, this person who doesn't know what's going on and doesn't realize that she was, someone's pulling the strings. Look at what happens if you know what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, then we're just talking about this person who has many mental health issues, like in order to tell the story of another character. And that is also not helped by the fact that the person in this episode is also a person of color. And it's like, so why did we do that to push the narrative of this white woman? It's unfortunate.
I do want to talk a little bit because we've been bashing the show mercilessly, which I mean, that's what we're here for. But about why we liked it, and particularly like in the first few episodes, I hated the main action, the main like the doll going out and doing whatever it was almost every single time. But when you're back in the dollhouse and you're seeing the dolls interact and you're seeing the people behind the scene, you're seeing Topher, you're seeing, oh my God, my brain has just gone to complete mush. You're seeing
Saunders and Ivy.
Yeah, Adele.
Yeah.
And, then eventually Boyd. I mean, what happens in the dollhouse is beautiful and fascinating. And like, I really would just spend the entire episode there, like have the dolls go out but you stay in the dollhouse and like interact with these people and learn about the other stuff.
Mhm.
Like that's where the show is great to me, and where you get the most character development, interaction. So like I always cringe when we cut back to the doll action, and I get excited when we come back to the dollhouse and everybody's,
I
just
totally agree, Danny, because I feel the same way that like every one of the episodes when they have to go out on their mission, it's very unsettling when you have to watch it and try to like interpret some of these things. Like, what are they trying to tell us here? Like, it's very unsettling, but it's a far more interesting and comforting thing to watch if you're just looking at it from the aspect of like, okay, we're in the dollhouse. These people have consented to this situation, and here's how they are developing as quote unquote wiped individuals and developing their own personalities.
I
yeah.
agree. And I do think like this show does a lot of interesting like questions, and it looks at like it's a very specific type of sci-fi that's almost post-apocalyptical, like towards the end,
Towards the end.
definitely. But like at the beginning, it shows the beginning of like what can go wrong and how it can
Yeah.
go wrong. I actually do like seeing the dolls out in action because it was also interesting to see that like field testing almost like it's uncomfortable knowing that they can't consent and the problems that they get into, but I did like seeing how they could imprint someone with a personality and how that works because it is part of the technical science of the science fiction of like the way Topher does this is he layers different personalities and histories of brain scans, and we find out that Rossum is this medical corporation that is able to like kind of collect all these brain scans as
Mhm.
they go on. And so I
It's
think
really a
that's
shame
interesting.
that the show had to be only 2 seasons, that it was cut short, because if we would have had more time, because I'm thinking about this now, you talking about this, how you like enjoy these missions and stuff.
Mhm.
I feel like the brevity of the show makes me want fewer missions, but if
Mhm.
we had like maybe 4 seasons or 6 seasons and we had a little more space, I could maybe be like, yeah, it's fine to have all these missions for a season and kind of see how they're able to test the limits of the imprints.
Mhm.
But then as we develop along to see what the actual implications of all of this are for society and how the dollhouse is and Rossum are actually manipulating things within the world as a whole. I think that would have been more interesting, but the way that they have to condense everything is a
I
lot.
do think that that's the problem because I didn't love season 2 because it felt like such a switch, and then they are like hopping around so often. But I think if you're
Mhm.
right, like I liked season 1 because it was a little bit slower. We got to see the work a little bit more, and then season 2 was less effective. But I could also see where it's like, but I like the inner workings of the house. It just feels like we spent so much time doing side missions, and we could have
Yeah.
been working on something else. So I think it's like
Yeah.
two different readings of a very similar issue.
Well,
But we all,
in
oh yeah,
episode 4, we get into the first non-sexual
Yes.
mission,
mhm,
although it starts with
yes,
her pretending to be a an escort.
hmm
Oh, actually, no, wait, doesn't it start with her being assaulted? No, pretending to be assaulted as an escort, right?
Hmm.
yes, and
That was
it's
all
like
part of this. That was
first.
all part of the scam. So she ends up being a bank robber, and I
Yes.
thought that was
Yes.
really cool. And the way they started to deal with her evolving personality when when she's looking at that sort of Picasso-like picture and
Mhm.
talking about, fragments and fragmented identities, like I'm not broken, like that started to get really great. And there was no, except for the opening, which was fake, there was no like bad woman stuff in that
Yeah.
episode. It was just
Hmm.
cool story.
And
Yeah.
this one is getting more into like the tech of it even more because this is the episode of the remote wiping. So Echo is on a
Hmm.
mission. She is remotely wiped. And so she is in her echo or stasis state.
Yes.
Uh, and she's just
Did I
sitting there
fall
being like,
asleep?
yeah, there's certain scripts that they teach to all the dolls. So there are certain things like I tried to be my best, and did I fall asleep? And so she gets wiped, and she said, "Did I fall asleep?" And they have to
For
bring
a
in,
little while.
yeah, and they
Yeah.
have to
Full
bring.
disclosure, I included that exchange in my next book.
Oh,
It's in your next
good! I
book?
love that.
It's just a little, like, it's totally in context, but it says one character who had fallen asleep was like, "Did I fall asleep?" And the other one's like, "For a little while," and
I
then they
love
help
it.
her get up, and that's it.
What a fun little nugget, though. Just that nobody, except for people who are diehard Dollhouse fans.
Exactly.
So this, like, they bring in Sierra to help get Echo out. And during this, we start getting little hints about a former person called Alpha.
Dun, dun,
who
dun.
was the big bad and might have
Because
some
we learned that the
fixation with
dolls are all
Echo.
named like Alpha, Beta, blah, 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 like
Yeah, Alpha, Sierra, Victor,
yeah, they're all
Whiskey.
codes.
And so there's all
Whiskey
these like
Tango Foxtrot, blah blah blah.
that like they said that Alpha is dead, but we find out later that Alpha might not be dead. Alpha might be Alan Tudyk.
There was quite an incident that happened with Alpha, basically, and nobody wants to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about that right now. That's trauma. And so yes, there's all those things going on in the background. Episode 5, Echo is a blind woman.
Is this the cult thing?
Oh
This
my
is the
God.
cult one.
Oh,
Where she's in a cult and they get her infiltrated because
because she was able to bamboozle their cult leader.
well, because she
and
really believed in him.
she believed in him. She took a bus there, and
yes.
just
Well, also
seen him
they
on
made her
TV.
blind.
Yes, so they made
Right.
her blind. So
Like,
but he is also abusive because he is a cult
Mhm.
leader. So he hits her in the face and she's like, I can see it's a miracle.
okay, but we also have to talk about the street interviews in this episode,
Oh my
which I
gosh,
think
that
were
was
the best.
wild.
Though our favorite, so they do for people who haven't watched. They have people interviewing people in the street about the Dollhouse. Like, do you believe it exists? You know, like, what do you think about it? What would you do if you had this power? And everybody has all these great answers, and it's fabulous. But this one dude who's there with his girlfriend, he's like I don't know. I think it'd be cool. Like, you could have like, pretty like one guy and another guy. They could like, just like check stuff out. Like, see what's what. Like, I think that could be pretty sweet for some guys. Like, nothing Queenie. Like, clearly he's like, I want to have gay sex, and the Dollhouse.
Yeah,
would
exactly.
and it would just be a one and done. And his girlfriend looks at
Yeah.
him like, what the fuck?
Also, this episode was wild to me with the on the street interviews because in episode 1, technically not the actual never aired, but the actual episode 1, Ballard is like walking up to people being like, have you heard about the Dollhouse? And
Yes.
people are like, no, I haven't. What are you talking about?
And now it's on TV.
supposed to be this like giant secret. And then all of a sudden, 5 episodes in, there's a million people on the street being like, well, here's what I know about the Dollhouse. And I'm like, well, then someone should have believed Ballard way back when. What are we talking about?
Yeah, because in this episode, pictures get out of Echo, right? And so
Mhm.
then people recognize Caroline, the missing girl.
This is also the episode, again, with fixation on sexual stuff. This is the
Yes.
Victor Boner episode where
Oh,
Victor
I forgot about
gets
this.
a boner in the
In the
shower,
shower.
looking at Sierra.
Man reaction. Hello, man reaction.
A
That's what
man
y'all
reaction, yeah, because they can't. Well, you can't call it a
can't say
boner
boner.
on syndicated TV. So
No, because and the doctor was like, "You mean an erection?" He's
yeah,
like,
I don't like the sound of that. And so this is also something where a lot of people. I've listened to a couple different podcasts. A lot of people have different reactions to Dollhouse. But people sometimes are like, oh, Joss Whedon definitely was the one who thought of the communal shower for men and women just naked in the show. And a lot of
Of
people are like,
course.
no, Fox wanted that because of, titillation on television. Either way, I actually don't mind the idea of showing like, hey, these people in their homeostasis, like look fine and they'll just shower together and they don't care until you get an erection sequence and then it's just unfortunate. So that's
but it was
that.
funny because they had to go looking through, hours and hours of video to see, to watch for his erections.
A man
Right.
reaction. So that's this episode. We have episode 6, which is Laura's favorite episode. It's the Patton Oswalt episode.
No,
Okay, hold
it's
on a
not my
second.
favorite. I was so sad.
Okay, we have to briefly interrupt. In episode 5, we have the first indication Echo is delivering a message to Ballard from inside the
Oh,
dollhouse.
yes.
Yes.
So like Echo's, so earlier when you were describing the first season, her self-awareness arc is I would say the major plot point of the first season, to my mind.
Yes.
There's other stuff too, but I love that moment when like, he suddenly realizes like, holy shit, the dollhouse is fucking with me.
Yeah.
Mhm. That it's real, and they're also communicating with me. What?
And there's some interesting episodes within these episodes where there's a character who's been with Paul as his neighbor who's obsessed with him called Millie.
Oh,
And
gosh.
throughout yeah, we'll get there in the next episode. So in the Patton Oswalt episode, it's just important to mention Millie before we get into this episode.
Yeah.
Patton Oswalt meets with Echo once a year. We find out that he has her imprinted with the memory of his wife, like the day she died, pretty much, to
Yeah.
show her the house that they bought together. And then Ballard comes in and asks Patton Oswalt hard questions like, hey, this feels like a sexual assault and like
Yeah.
it's inappropriate. And he's like, look, I just want a beautiful moment with my wife. And the Ballard like is like, and then you have sex with her. And
Yeah.
it's like very uncomfortable. This
And
is
I
also
screamed,
very
Patton Oswalt, no.
this is also a very heavy sexual assault episode because we find
Yeah.
out that Sierra's handler has been sexually assaulting her in the dollhouse when she is in her stasis level where she can't consent. And she's having reactions to this where she like you can tell she sort of remembers
Is this
even
when
though
she's
not supposed to.
The
having?
black paint.
I was just the art.
Mhm.
The art is
Yeah.
what she's showing this trauma through.
Yeah. And so in this episode, the head of the dollhouse sends this one guy out to like go after Paul Ballard, and then it is a bait and switch because she calls his phone and leaves a message for Millie saying there are 3 roses in a vase. The first one is white, and then Millie, or a third one is white, and Millie, we find out that she's a doll, so they did it to him again. And she kills the person who was sexually assaulting Sierra. Episode 7 is where it's like the reliving of past trauma where people get drunk on a campus, quote unquote, where there's like some medical thing going on. We find out in this episode that Caroline had a boyfriend, Leo, who died.
Well, this is like the pandemic episode, right?
Yeah,
Where
it's like airborne.
I guess an
issues.
epidemic.
Yeah, epidemic where everyone's getting drunk and they use the dolls because they won't be affected by this airborne.
And also the way that they dress up Echo in like that typical schoolgirl outfit. I'm like, really? Okay.
Just that's not even the bad one where she's with the professor and she's
no,
like, you're just so
that gets even
smart.
worse.
Oh,
That's
I hated
way
that
worse.
one. Yeah.
We also have to talk about in this episode. This is the one where Mellie gets revealed. She's like Mellie, who's Paul's girlfriend, I guess, neighbor. They've been.
I mean, they're having sex at this point.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're having sex, but they
But
weren't
he's
really
also having
dating.
weird
I
sex dreams about
shipped them.
Caroline, where he says she has something I need.
Yeah. It's so frustrating
Anyway,
because after yelling Patton Oswalt no, then you're yelling Mellie no because he's
know.
dreaming about Caroline, and it's like, oh.
Anyway, but she suddenly, like, they're in an intimate or like moment, and then she suddenly goes blank and is like, we have a message from inside the dollhouse, and Paul's like, oh.
And
And then he's like, I'm a good guy. I was trying to make sure this was consensual.
And then and then this also goes towards the consent issue where like I think they don't really dive into the fact that like Paul did not consent to be with someone who like it's not active.
It's not who
consent.
they are.
Yes.
So yeah, he did also. He was, in some ways, he was assaulted, but also he did not consent to sexually assault this woman.
Yes,
because that's what happened.
It's like
and
double.
I think it's layered. And that does sometimes get touched on, but not very much. And it annoyed me where it was like, no, you can tell he's actively like in the like past episode, Patton Oswalt.
He doesn't know
like,
who he slept with. Like,
it's rough. And so that's that episode. It's quite a lot. Episode 8, November is back. November is Mellie's code name. She's back at the house, and Echo, Sierra, Victor, and November all wake up. And they like try to quote unquote escape. And you find out that this was an episode where they were pretty much imprinted to get closure by like waking up and remembering things. But we find out in this episode, 2 episodes later from Sierra's sexual assault, her closure is going to face a man who we find out sent her to the dollhouse so that he could repeatedly rape her. Yeah. And that's just what happens. So
she was stalked basically, and the whole situation is disgusting.
Put into a mental institution, and
and
we find out in season 2 that no one else who was at the LA house was aware of this situation. What Topher thought was she was schizophrenic, but he finds out that this person who stalked her made medication that could bring on psychosis with people. And so he did this to convince them to take her in, and then was hiring her out once a month to be with him because she did not consent to be with him when she had the ability to consent. And they do say, like, no one knew, but the higher ups know, like the higher ups signed off on
Somebody
giving
knew.
Sierra to this person once they find out about it, because he's a huge donor. And
which leads to questions of, like, at what point do you draw the line, or, you know,
yeah. Episode 9, there's a spy in the house. We find out that Dominic, who has been like just his entire character throughout the series, is walking up to Echo and being like, I don't trust you, and walking away. We find out he's a spy for the NSA, and it was like, you were a terrible spy. What were you doing screaming at this person the entire time? And so
also Ballard was a terrible FBI agent because he started talking about every case to his neighbor in the hallway. Like, what the fuck?
No one knows confidentiality.
Nobody believes him, so he's immediately just like, look,
Melly, you're obsessed with me. Let's talk about
you random person I met in my
this was
apartment
also
building.
So deeply ingrained in the early 2000s to not think Melly could possibly be a doll because she was a size 6. A lot of people were like, not the fat girl, and it's like she wasn't fat.
She's not fat at all.
No, she's absolutely. I mean, I have to full admit, I think she is the most beautiful character in the actress in the whole series. And I love seeing a non-skinny person in the show because you don't see enough of those.
Right. But like, I think I remember watching this, and the implication back then was like, it couldn't possibly be Melly because she is not a stick thin woman, and who would want to make that a sex worker? And it's like, well, many people look anywhere. So that's just a side note for that.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. And so that was the shock of it. And then
I'm kind of baffled that she was considered the fat character.
I mean, it's 2009. There were that was like cocaine skinny to a T.
Just Sierra.
So, yeah, exactly. And then so this is the first time we also learn about people going to the attic because they sent Dominic to the attic. Episode 10 is the murder mystery, so it's Who Killed Me episode. Where
I have a soft spot for that one.
I do like that episode.
I like the thing with the part I like is probably not the part you like. I like the part where Adele and what's the character's name, the woman. I like their little relationship. That was so good
because she had a personal relationship with this client, and she like imprinted her to see if something ever happened, and then something does happen because her son murders her. So, and she's obsessed with horses. I also like her because in future episodes, when Echo is always talking about the people who are in her head, she usually brings up that character.
I know.
I like that Echo has a soft spot for her, where she was like, I really just like the woman who wanted to find out who her murderer was. That's fun. And so episode 11 is called Briar Rose, which is, indication of Sleeping Beauty. And this is the beginning of finding out who Alpha could potentially be. This is where we also discover that Dr. Saunders was a doll. She was a doll called Whiskey, and she used to be the fan favorite. Episode 12.
Wait, we got to go back and just briefly mention that the episode is also about a girl who was serially sexually assaulted as a child. So Echo has to play her adult self to save her. The whole thing was Topher's idea. I mean, I imagine
because this is like a foster child,
having never
correct?
watched the show. And remember, I mean, it's just.
This was like a foster child situation, if I'm remembering correct.
Yes, and they brought her in because it was her future self who was helping her through her own sexual trauma.
Because who would know better than her in the future?
Yeah. Topher has some messed up ideas. And again, I've listened to different podcasts. I listened to one by two queer women talking about the show, and they were like, oh yeah, Topher's a sociopath. And then I listened to another podcast that was much more a fan of the Joss Whedon verse, and they're like, he has a heart of gold. And I'm like,
what?
I think that's an interesting look at the different spectrums of Topher and how you view Joss Whedon shows.
Oh my god!
I'm kind of more leaning towards sociopath, but okay.
I think sure.
I think
he's a likable sociopath.
He is a
that's exactly it.
All think about it. Adele is a likable sociopath.
Yes.
Boyd is every single character on the show that's part of the Dollhouse is a likable sociopath.
I think
everyone.
people who buy in too much to the Whedonverse and then watch Topher's ending are like, Heart of Gold, look at all what he's been through. And I'm like, you mean
No.
the consequences of his own actions?
Right.
Yes, he was hoisted by his own petard. Like, that's all that happened. Like, he did this. It's his fault. So, that's, I think I lean towards sociopath as well. And then we have episode 12 is called Omega. This is
Oh
dealt
wait,
with.
that's where the quote was. Sorry, Ballard said in Briar Rose, "There is no provision for consensual slavery. It is wrong." That's the one I was thinking for earlier.
That's good.
Yeah.
And they do bring that up. So Paul begins to work with them in the Omega episode because they do sort of take. So Alpha kidnaps Echo, and they
Mhm.
kidnap this woman who they imprint with Caroline's identity so that they can murder Caroline. And so Echo.
Yeah.
And we learned that Alpha was imprinted with like every single one of his imprints, and it made him go insane. But there's also a question of nature versus nurture, because we find out in a past
Mhm.
life he was a serial killer, and he often made the marks that he had made on whiskey. So there's there's an implication that he did have some kind of remembrance with that. And then he tries to do the same thing to Echo, but Echo is able to kind of overcome it, and she injures him. But he does take the Caroline imprint with him, and Paul begins working with them in order to get November out. And it's supposed to be this big, huge bait and switch where they're like, "It's agreed, we'll let her out." And everyone thinks that it's going to be Caroline because he's been looking for her for the entire season, and instead he lets Millie/November out. And I was like, "Who was
Yeah,
shocked by that?"
he makes a bargain with them to get Melly out.
Yeah.
And nobody
then
was
I thought that
shocked
was
by that.
sweet.
I thought it was very sweet, but
Mhm.
and then we have episode 13 technically, which is it's out of order. It's
Oh, Epitaph, right?
yeah,
Yes.
Epitaph 1. So this show, again, Joss Whedon had many shows canceled before their time, so he had already pretty much recorded Epitaph 1 and 2, I believe, or at least Epitaph 1 as an ending. So this aired, but then they also had another season, so it was a little bit confusing to viewers. I actually don't remember watching much of season 2 because like I remember season 1 being like the whole thing. And so in Epitaph 1, we have this episode where we find out that the world has been overrun with people having their personalities wiped. Again, like we said, there are all these people who are in power imprinting themselves on others. There are people like butchers who are trying to sell people who have been wiped. It's very scary. And it's a whole episode where they find the dollhouse. We, in flashbacks, find out that Caroline and Ballard are fighting together type thing. We find out that Boyd left Dr. Saunders there, but they might be in love. And so she's waiting for him. That completely goes by the wayside. So they probably
Yeah.
didn't. They just forgot that existed in season 2, I guess.
I'm glad.
But it's a very specific episode where there's a child there who we think is a human, like without imprints or anything, and then we find out that they were imprinted, but they are able to overtake her, and Whiskey helps them imprint them with Caroline, and she says that she can take them to a safe zone where people can't get imprinted, and they leave as other people break into the dollhouse and Whiskey watches, kind of thing. So
Mhm.
it's a very interesting and confusing episode because Laura said, "I
And
don't know
also
what's going on."
fantastic
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the most popular episodes, I think. And
It's
I
very
certainly love
jarring.
it. Yeah.
I think it's really good, and I think on rewatch it would like heighten how good it is, because I think when
Yeah.
you're first watching it, you're a little bit confused, but
It
then
is
Yes, I do remember
confusing.
that.
yeah, it's just very jarring when you like watch this like Alpha is gone. Season 2.
Well, I can confirm that it gets better with each watching.
Okay, that's good. Season 2 is a little bit of a wild ride.
Yeah.
And I know we have a little bit of a hard out soon. So I want to kind of go through it as fast as we can. But this is like the season where Echo starts being unable to be wiped. She just starts collecting people in her head
Mhm.
and using them to like help get her out
She's
of
able to kind of
situations
bounce
or
around
Mhm.
to previous imprints to use them to help her through situations that she's sent out on.
And there are certain arcs that are probably full season arcs that got condensed into 3 or 4 episodes
Mhm.
because of the timeline. So the first arcs would be the Senator Perrin introduction, where he is an anti-Rossum guy who we find out later is actually a doll who they took
Mhm.
his original personality, changed it, and had him married to his handler. And they wanted him to like go into the Senate hearing. He gets Melly on his side, Catherine, to like talk about her time with Rossum and what she has discovered about her time there. And Echo tries to help him at one point, but they end up pretty much like failing. He discredits any anti-Rossum rhetoric. He kind of like goes back on all the stuff and all the hard work he had done, just like Rossum wanted. And during this time, the LA Dollhouse were trying to overtake them. We also get introduced to Echo or Caroline's old roommate who hates her guts now because she has an arm injury. It is one of Joss Whedon's favorite actresses to have, Summer Gao. And so she's introduced as also a love interest to Topher. And that's kind of that overarching arc. Then we also have the Dollhouse, Rossum overall trying to take back the Dollhouse, Adele trying to get back in power. She double crosses Topher by giving them the technology for the like remote wipe that he developed, or the ability to wipe anyone. And then we kind of get into the Alpha murdering Paul.
Alan
Tudyk just coming back in to murder
Alpha.
Paul because for a while Echo escapes with Paul and she's like working with him. And during this time, Echo is developing more of a personality. So she falls in love with Paul, but Paul has a lot of trauma involved with sleeping with someone who cannot consent. Again, that I feel like they don't delve into that enough, but I do think that that's there. So he does turn down any relationship with Echo because Caroline is not an active participant in their relationship, but she's always there type thing. And so they bring her back, but because Alpha realizes that she loves Paul, he murders Paul pretty much and like takes a wedge. So we also have things like Victor being awakened and leaving, but coming back for the Sierra of it all. DeWitt is an alcoholic for a single episode. One entire episode.
I thought it was maybe 2.
Okay. She's an alcoholic for 2 episodes, but not that much. Like I remember it felt weird.
She hits bottom for an episode and a half, I think.
Yeah.
But Boyd like walks in and he's like, "You're falling down drunk." And I'm like, well, it seems like she's had like a couple bad days, but you all are also living there. So it's just a weird thing.
There's no escape for them either.
Yeah. And like when Victor leaves, he was going to become a perfect soldier who were going to break in and steal Rossum's things. But
I do like that episode for what it shows in terms of like the effects, because they all act like once you're wiped, that you have no memories of that place and that it will totally not affect you and you'll be exactly like you were when you came out. There's this connotation that everything will be the same,
and
but he sleeps in
like PTSD, like
right. Yeah, but he's still dealing with trauma and he is now even worse because he's sleeping in a bathtub because it reminds him of the pods that they sleep in.
And this is the episode where Priya,
nice
who
touch.
is Sierra's original person, and Tony, who is Victor in real life, want to run away together, but they end up going to the attic with Echo. And during this time, we also find out during the prior episodes, Sierra does kill her rapist. And so she has to go back into the Dollhouse, even though she didn't consent to being there in the first place, to protect her from it, which is a weird little loop around to just kind of keep Sierra on the show. Episode 10, we go to the attic. We find out that it's like a computer system fueled by people's fear. It is Monsters Inc. style.
Or the Matrix, sort
of. Yeah.
And we meet Clyde, who was like one of the original creators of Rossum, but was double crossed by the other founder, who he can't remember their name or what they look like. They could be male, they could be female, they could be anything. This is 2009, so they did not really have a respect for gender as a construct, but but they so this is a question of like, who is the other big bad of this season, because now we've met Clyde. And then we find out that DeWitt is the one who sent Echo and the rest of them to the attic to figure out what was going on, because she's actually an ally.
She's actually on their side. Okay.
Episode 11, they're trying to recreate Carolyn's wedge because it's missing. Bennett comes back. They bring Saunders back into the fold because Saunders ran away when she figured out that she was once an active and she didn't know who she was. During this time, it is implicated that she and Boyd have started a romantic relationship.
Yes.
But Saunders ends up murdering Bennett, who is Caroline's old roommate and Topher's love interest, right in front of Topher. I wasn't expecting that on a rewatch. I don't think I've seen any of these episodes, so that was very shocking.
It was pretty shocking.
This does traumatize Topher. We meet Clyde 2.0, but this is when it's revealed that Caroline knows who the other founder is, and it is discovered that it is Boyd Langton in this,
which was shocking to me because I had sent a message to Danny and Hannah saying I still have hopes for Boyd.
Well, also,
and they did not reply.
Again, the thing is Boyd was a character who I don't think Joss Whedon knew was going to be the big bad. Like, I think that came later, just with the way that he was constructed. It just feels like Joss was like, oh, it's possible that he was the big bad, so let's do that.
It's starting
instead.
to fit. Yeah.
And so that's how it happened, which is why we get the Dr. Saunders and Boyd moment in Epitaph 1. So, so much fun. But the episode 12, the group
hold
goes,
on just one second. So when you were mentioning the arcs of the season, we forgot maybe the most important one is that Echo has basically decided her job now is to free all the dolls in the dollhouse. And so there's a lot of little things throughout the episode. I know that we're hurrying because my time is
you're fine,
not eternal.
No, and so they go to Tucson. Boyd tricks Topher into solving the problem. I loved this because I was like, what a sneaky little sneak. Like, he was like, what if you fixed it and we used it against the bad people? But he really just wants it, and he tricks Topher in the simplest way to get the broad wiper working. And so Topher does this, but he during this time, there's a lot of different struggles. November / Melly is killed during this time. We also, they quote unquote killed Paul, but then they brought him back as an imprint of himself. And then he,
that was actually a pretty cool storyline, because
I did like that storyline.
I liked that.
And then they brought Melly
back. Not the second time.
But they removed the piece of him that understood Echo and had a relationship with her. Yes. And so he ends up falling in love with November again, but it's okay because he's not in love with Echo type thing. And so they're together, but then November is killed, and they end up through the episode, they wipe Boyd using the tech that Topher created, and Echo uses the doll state Boyd as a suicide bomber to destroy Rossum's headquarters. And then they're like, oh, we saved the world. But the epilogue depicts them fleeing through the apocalyptical future of Epitaph 1. Epitaph 2, it's year 2020. It's 1 year after the events of Epitaph 1. They find Caroline pretty much. Topher is still kind of in his broken state that he was in the original season finale of last
Paul
season.
is killed and they move on extremely quickly.
But then Echo shames Sierra for having a lot of complicated feelings about how she was finally with Tony. They had a child and he left to fight the technology war. And she was like, I got left again and I have all this trauma. And then Echo was like, he loves you. Isn't that good enough? And I was like, actually, Echo, this feels like your trauma, not coming and seeing Sierra's. But anyway, Topher is able to make this remote device that will bring everyone back. But Sierra, Victor, Echo, and Topher all kind of stay in the building, or Topher commits suicide by saving everyone. And then everyone else stays in this bunker for a year so that they will not be affected, because Sierra doesn't want to lose the memories of having her son or, all of those things. And so it's kind of, and then we find out that Alpha is good now, and he gives Echo the imprint of Paul to put in her head so she can be with her dead leveler whenever she wants. We've talked a lot.
And that's how it ends.
We've talked a lot about the consent and the sex worse, but I do think we haven't really touched on, and I want to in the final minutes. It's just the fact of what makes a person, because through this we have Echo kind of defining herself and coming to be more of what's in our brains, or when do you become a different person? And she's kind of making the active decision to leave Caroline behind, or when Caroline becomes part of her again, she has to become a part of the whole, and she's not going to replace that. And we also have the Sierra and Victor character being no, we're not starting back at square one. We want to remember who we are. And I think that that's an interesting discussion, because it's these people who agreed to 5 years of service and then they get to be themselves again. well, when does the other person who was with you during that time have a right to become part of you? And I think that that's an interesting discussion that like did get looked at quite a bit in this show.
Danny, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on the show and maybe that specifically.
Well, I mean, I agree. That's one of the neatest things about it. And like almost every character has to deal with what it means to be human or not human. And I've been reading a lot of books that involve androids and synthetic organisms. And there's a lot of, I just think it's endlessly fascinating, and it makes you wonder, had they had more seasons, what, but I don't know. I think you summarized it very well. I mean, at a certain point, Echo-ness is, potentially she's a completely different person than the Caroline. And so there's multiple cases where the doll and does not want to go back to the original, but like they also feel like the original has a right to exist. And I just think that was the reason that we rewatched the show a million times, is because of stuff like that, and because of the interactions and in the Dollhouse, and the conversations that you were able to have between these characters that are so super well developed. Topher, who's a completely amoral, like, genius who could redesign an entire human neural system.
A heart of gold, guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
The last thing that I have in my notes for this, because I had a big note in my iPad, is Topher, the serial mind rapist, gets his redemption arc.
Yeah.
But I mean, along the way, that the idea that you could take a human mind and reprogram it is not that. They make it seem very believable, and I mean, who knows how close we are, but we all know that the owner of Twitter, who shall not be named, is experimenting with technology to do just this. And with the advent of AI, I feel like it's incredibly relevant. That part of the show, the concept is incredibly relevant. I just wish a fucking woman had directed it.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I do want to talk about FTF too,
Okay.
because it's such a great episode to my mind, particularly in the way that the tech society is described. They're so fascinating. They have little like USB chips that they can only put in one at a time.
They can only have so many powers.
Skill.
Yeah. And sometimes they're speaking a different language.
Joss Whedon did something very similar in Buffy with a character called Adam, who's like part demon, part human, part machine. And in order to access information, he takes like a floppy disk, like a 3.5-inch floppy disk, and sticks it in his chest.
Oh my God. Joss Whedon just wants people to take a memory saving device and put it inside themselves. That's amazing.
It really does. But well, I mean, it's also neat. It's like the concept that you have constant ability to change, or does it have to be one thing at a time? I mean, I think that's, the idea of like how you learn things, and what it like, would it mean the same thing if you had the full mastery of like black belt karate skills, if you could literally just put a chip in and like you have it? Because like there's so much else that comes with developing the skills to get to that mastery, and the things that happen along the way, are just as important, if not more important. So I think that was interesting to see how that was done, and the slang was so good, because at one point one character gets pissed and others like, "Yo, man, log off." I just feel like that was really funny.
I do like the idea of the inserting, because I also think like it's smart in the way that it reflects how we are with technology. Like we all are obsessed with it, and in Epitaph 2, all the people like want to stop them from resetting everyone, because they're like, no, this is amazing. We get to cut corners. We get to like map this onto our brain, where we almost remember all the steps we took to make ourselves experts, but we never actually had to do that work. And like Victor/Tony talk about how he does have kind of that obsession with them. And I'm like, no, if we all could have like one skill where you just like insert it into yourself and you have it, everyone would start collecting skills to have at a moment's notice, to just like have at the ready. Like I would love to just insert that I'm a speed reader, but also if I don't need to speed read, I could take it out and be something else. So I think that does show kind of society's obsession with getting to the there instead of the journey of it, that you get to have while you're doing it. I also do like the difference between Epitaph 1 and 2, because I also do think it shows how the show grew. because at the end of season 1, it's very much Caroline focused of like, who was Caroline? What was she doing? And like, they have her and they refer to her as Caroline. So these shows must have been, not in sequential order. Like they must have done them within each season. With number 2, they talk about how she is now Echo, how she has become much more than what Caroline was, how she's existed for too long to kind of go back. And there is the acceptance that Echo is now a fully realized person, kind of like you were saying, Dani, like the entire show is the realization of who Echo is as a character. And I do like that you get to kind of see that difference, because they are technically told in the same universe, but they're so different from season 1 to season 2.
Yes.
How do we feel about Boyd being the big bad?
I mean, I didn't obviously expect it, but I think the way that it wraps up, I guess it makes sense. It's definitely one of those that they want to try and shock you, similar to how they tried to throughout the series, where they were like showing that the doll, this one is actually a doll, and we thought that they weren't. And I think that it's definitely like a bait and switch situation where they're just trying to add a little shock value to make us think that we can't trust anyone, that there's evil all around us.
Does it become more effective the more you rewatch it, Dani, where you could like see how Boyd is potentially the bad person?
To be honest, no. Like I just kind of go with the flow, and every time I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like somewhere like deep into season 2, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. He's the bad guy, isn't he? Oh shit. Well, I never saw that coming, like the 6th time I'm watching it. So
good.
I don't feel like, I feel like I agree with you that it wasn't like this was planned. Like there's a lot of stuff that Whedon did in some other shows where he really like saw the long game, and I think that's one of the reasons why he had so much success. But I think this was not a long game. This was just ad hoc. I don't know at what point he decided, but I feel like the stuff we were shown early on, while you couldn't say it excluded Boyd being the bad guy, uh, I I don't feel like it really. I don't think in episode 1, oh yeah, Boyd's the bad guy, I can see it. Like not at all.
Good.
Right.
Do we have any favorite episodes that you can think of?
I'll tell you what, the most shocking episode is the episode where Echo is a mother
Oh, we didn't
and
talk
has
about
her
that one.
baby taken away from her. That
Ugh.
is disturbing and shocking, and I will never forget it. Like
don't know
it's
how you-
extremely well acted too, but how upsetting.
I don't know how you watch that episode and you think that Topher is a good person. Like he does
He
not think
has
of
a
the
heart of gold.
implications of giving Echo, like in the episode, Echo has the ability to breastfeed, and so she connects with the child who she is told is her child and who she is caring for. And I don't understand how they thought that that was a long-term goal, like what that guy thought he was doing with that, because like your baby is going to remember this person as the mother, and unless it's a long-term situation, that doesn't work.
Because in this mission, the biological mother had passed away, and the father does not know how to care for the child, so hires a doll to
be his dead wife.
The dead wife.
Yeah. So strange.
Not the only time a doll was hired to be a dead wife, by the way.
That's true.
Patton
Lots
Oswalt.
He comes back in season 2 for reasons. So
my favorite is not even an episode, but like the thing where Topher, I don't know if he's bringing back an old friend or just creating a friend.
Oh yeah.
And they just like hang out and like play Nerf football and laser tag. Like I don't know why, I just love that part so much. Like I get so happy when that comes on, because I want to see, I would love to, like the character of Topher is so fascinating and so well acted that you just want to see him just doing normal stuff, like, not serially mind raping people, but like just playing football and like, watching movies and eating popcorn and just hanging out with the pal.
Yeah.
I just thought that was lovely.
This is such a one that we also didn't talk about, but I feel like bears mentioning because I did enjoy that episode. The serial killer episode where they imprinted the guy to be a serial killer so they could find out where his victims were. Like that one was so messed up, but I was like, I'm actually
Yeah.
fascinated with how this worked and like how they accidentally switched imprints. I thought was interesting. And like, I thought that that was a good like bottle episode almost because it was a part of the season 2. So it's more overarching of what's going on, but I did like that that was just like a straightforward like what's going on episode. But weird that Echo still has that person living in her brain. I don't love
Yeah.
that.
And I take exception to the depiction of the serial killer because I feel like there's a certain serial killer stereotype that includes what's in Silence of the Lambs, where it was extremely transphobic. It's almost always like queer phobic. Like
That is fair.
there's a man who was not treated well or given enough attention by the women in his life, so he becomes a queer murderer. Like he's never shown to be explicitly queer, but I think he's queer coded for sure.
Okay.
And so I really, that struck me this time because I've only been fairly recently hyper aware of the issues with Silence of the Lambs and how we have this character archetype that really influenced the way a lot of people saw trans women
Yes.
for a long time. And I feel like that show does exactly the same thing. I don't know when Silence of the Lambs was a while before that, but
Yeah, it was in the 90s,
90s.
I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, just wanted to add
And
that caveat to that
no,
episode, which I did
that
really
That's good
like.
context.
that is a very good context. I didn't read that character as queer coded, but I think that that's incredibly fair to say.
Mhm.
And Silence of the Lamb, like everyone should look into the oral history of it. People came out about how it was harmful back then. It's just no one listened. And
Right.
so the information was always there, which is what also makes it even more harmful that people were coming out saying this is a
Yeah.
problem.
I
And
was
they were not
completely
listening.
clueless, and I don't think I heard anybody talking about it, which is wild to think about. But
I only know about like how like it's always been, discussed because I have an obsession with Silence of the Lambs because it was one of the first thriller/horrors that I watched with Laura. There's like a whole
I was gonna
history of it.
say I introduced Hannah to the movie, and then
It
she
freaked
became
me
a big
out.
fan.
Yeah, and then I became a big
I've
fan
watched it
after I
many
hated
times
it.
myself.
Yeah. So I listened to a lot of podcasts discuss it, and they all like the ones who do it well discuss that caveat to it. So,
Sure.
but with that, another caveat that we will do, and then we'll do wrap up. Everyone should look into Joss Whedon and the allegations against him for hostile work environments. There have been things that came out about his obsession with controlling women on the set, as well as his on-set behavior with Ray Fisher on Justice League, who is a Black man, and how he was treated very horribly. Others have come out to stand with these people, stating that these things should not have happened. And
Just
that
to note
is
also that
important
the
context.
big bad was a Black man in Dollhouse as well.
And so there are pretty egregious allegations, especially regarding Michelle Trachtenberg, who said that it was well known on the set that she could not be alone in the room with Joss Whedon as a teenager. So that is probably those are all important context to have. So that's something we just want to say to be cognizant of, to say those things out loud, because like we said, if no one's talking about it, then no one knows. So with that said, Dani, thank you so much for suggesting
Oh, thank you. This has been a delight.
This was an amazing conversation. Can you tell people where to find some of your great work that is probably a little bit kinder to some of these things that we've been talking about today?
Dani Finn writes. Dani Finn writes is my handle on Twitter and on Instagram, and you could find my many crazily large number of books via my links there. And I could probably drop my link tree if you want.
Oh, yeah. If you
Awesome.
want to send it to us, we'll add it to the show notes. Please
Yeah.
pick up some of Dani's work. They have some amazing things out there.
Dani is prolific.
Wings So Soft.
Yes. I also want to mention
West. Those are
and my
excellent
next
ones.
one, which is very exciting. I'm just going to briefly plug it. It is called The World Within, and it is a sapphic romance featuring a trans feminine heroine, which is a book that I wanted to write for a long time, but didn't until I got a little help, encouragement. So anyway, that's coming in September. I'm very excited.
Sounds amazing. I can't wait to read it. Well, Dani, thank you again. Please go check out their work. They're amazing, and they had so many great things to say and helped with a lot of context today. So we appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. And
All
whoever's
right.
still listening right now, you're a rock star.
And please join us tomorrow for regularly scheduled programming for On Wednesdays.
More
We read.
Jim Butcher. Get ready, people. You can find us at Our Pod on all the socials or over at ourpod.com.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.